All right. So today we will be going over ratio utility billing, which is often referred to as RUBS in the industry. So RUBS, ratio utility billing system, actually. Can anybody here tell me what RUBS is?
It's shared
Here's
between the units and it's like a rate, it gets split up. So they get an individual bill, but it's all on one meter.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Kimberly. That's perfect. So RUBS is a ratio utility billing system. It's meant for allocating a master meter bill utility expense to the different residents within a multifamily community. It's a different way of splitting it up. So the more historic, I guess you'd say, way of doing it, the older way of doing it would be just equally dividing it between each one of your units. So if you had 4 units, just splitting it 25% for each. So what REVS does is it creates a little bit more of a complicated system on the front end, but it's a better system because then the residents are getting an allocation that better fits what their actual usage is. So if the old method was splitting it up just 4 different ways, now utilizing RUBS is actually taking into effect how many occupants are in that unit and how many occupants are in that unit compared to the entire building that are on that meter. And then also it's taking into consideration how much square footage is in that unit and how much square footage is compared to the entire amount of units that are all on that master meter. And so the only units that are factored into the equation are the ones that are actually on that meter. So sometimes a PG&E, like at 476 Cortez, for example, we have 3 units that are all on the same PG&E meter, and then 2 of the units actually have individual ones. So you can kind of get a little bit more complex that way. So it's just, you're only judging it based on those meters that are actually, or those units that are actually assigned to that meter, excuse me. So first, I thought it'd be good to discuss what a master meter is. So from a master meter, so master water meter specifically, is when more than one unit is allocated to that meter. So it's really, really common with older buildings. Anything built before like 1975, 1980 is going to have most likely just one meter assigned to it. So if you have like a duplex, triplex, 4 unit building, most of the time only going to have 1 unit. Excuse me, 1 meters. Now it's great when they do have multiple meters because that gives you the ability then to bill back the tenants for their water, and they just go ahead and put that water in their name and they take on the bill for it. But when there's only one master meter, we have the option of then splitting up the bill between the residents and then allocating it to them according to their square footage and number of occupants. The best way to find out how many water meters that a property has is first you can call the water company and ask them. They're not always the easiest to get a hold of, and they're oftentimes challenged on like what is actually at the property. So if you have a scenario like that where they are not able to look up how many meters are at the property, then if you physically go to the property, the water meters are usually located at the front of the building near the sidewalk area, and they look like this. There will be a kind of a graded metal piece or concrete, I guess. I'm not sure the material, but anyways, it sits over an opening in the ground, and in the opening is one single water meter, and you'll see a single grate for each individual water meter usually. I'm sure that's probably a building code to have one per containment, but I'm not 100% positive on that. So maybe don't repeat that, but I think that's kind of my theory on it. And so you always see those. So if you go up to a property and you see 4 of these grates out in front of the property, that means there are 4 water meters. And if you have 4 units, that means each one's individually allocated. But if you go up to a fourplex and there's only one water meter grate, then that means there's only one water meter. And that means all 4 units have been allocated to this 1 meter. So as an owner and a property manager, you have the decision when you only have 1 meter for 4 units on whether you want to utilize RUBS or you want to just include the water for the property. So then when you start looking at gas and electric, this is much, much, much less common than the water is. Water, most properties were built this way in the old days. With gas and electric, that's not the case. All old properties were still built with an individual gas meter and an individual electric meter for each unit. But what you do run into with the older properties is those ones that have guest houses. Now, anytime there's a guest house, they definitely did not add a separate meter for it. So if you look at like 298 Hawthorne, a really old property has a guest house, 1 meter for the whole property, and now they're going to be 3. The other most common when you have gas and electric is when you have a ADU. So it's very, very challenging to get new gas meters. Electric meters are more possible than gas meters are. So what you'll see a lot of times with investors building ADUs is they'll only put in an electric meter. So if they were able to make everything in the unit electric, then they're able to allocate it by directly through PG&E. But in a scenario where they decided not to do a new meter, or maybe if there's gas in the unit, then they're usually going to need to utilize RUBS. Another thing to note is that if you have 4 units at their property, and this is kind of more of a Monterey County statement, so I'm not as sure about Santa Clara County and Santa Cruz County, but in Monterey County, typically, if you see less gas and electric meters than you do units, you're either expecting there to be an ADU or a guest house. And if there's not an ADU or guest house, you probably have an illegal unit in there. If you see 4 units and only 3 meters, normally that was built as a triplex. And at some point, another unit was split out and added to the property. On the water meter side, it's also important to note for Monterey County is that if your property is regulated by Monterey Peninsula Water Management District, which is essentially the whole Monterey Peninsula with the exception of Marina, then you're not even able to add water meters. So if your property is only built with 1 water meter, you're stuck pretty much in perpetuity for always only having 1 meter. Cal-Am is not adding new meters on the Monterey Peninsula, but if you're in Salinas, San Jose, Santa Cruz, something like that, that's not an issue for you. All right, so moving on now to the benefits. What are some of the benefits of utilizing RUBS at an apartment building or any multifamily building?
Well, the owner doesn't get stuck with the whole bill, right?
Exactly. So you reduce the costs, right?
Another common thing is when you have tenants then being responsible for the water bills, you tend to see usage go down as well.
Definitely. Absolutely.
And the ratio system or whatever, algorithm, whatever you call it, that we use for the tenants, like if one tenant only has a single person versus another one that has 5 occupants, they're not being charged the same amount, like a flat rate.
Thanks, Kimberly. That's a really good benefit. So back to that beginning scenario where I was talking about back in the old days before RUBS, they used to just split it evenly between 4 units. Well, it was unfair for that tenant who was a single person living in a small studio, like a 400 square foot studio. If the front house was maybe a main big house with 5 people and 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms and a laundry room and all these different water usage things. So the allocation should have really been weighted to that front house, and it was just split 25%. So that person who was living in the studio was paying more than their fair share. Thanks, Kimberly. That was really good. So to kind of expand on some of the benefit, like Brett and Diana mentioned, reduce utility costs. Anytime you reduce utility costs at a multifamily property, in turn, you're automatically going to be increasing cash flow because that reduction in cost is going to hit right down to your NOI, your net operating income. And then as Brett mentioned, in a recent study by the NAR, they found that when they started charging residents for their own utility usage, they found between a 6 to 27% reduction in the amount of water usage. So once somebody becomes financially responsible for something, naturally they use it a lot less because each time they turn on that faucet, even though it's a very incrementally small amount, it's still money coming out of their pocket. And so maybe that 30-minute shower where they're warming up the water for 10 minutes turns in just your normal 10-minute shower. And then also to go even further on that same point is that now that the tenants are responsible for the cost of their water, they're also more cognizant of when there are leaks in the property and what that means for them when there's a leak. So anytime there's a leak in the property, we're wasting water, and that waste is creating a cost each time. So each drop of water that you see literally taking down from the faucet is costing someone money. And so when it's the tenant that it's costing, they're going to be much more front forward getting it fixed because they know that in order to stop the drain, literally stop the drain of money, they need to get that repaired. And so when we see a lot of times when the landlord's paying it, if there's just that little tiny drip on that water spigot, or it's just dripping a little bit from your faucet in the bathroom, it's not bothering you much and it's not costing you money. So why make a big deal about it? And as a landlord, we always want to take care of any type of running, dripping, leaking water, regardless of who's paying for the bill. So whether it's the landlord paying that bill or it's the tenant paying it, we still want to take care of water repairs immediately. Water is the most dangerous element to a rental property, especially on our water adjacent properties in Santa Cruz and in Monterey County, because if that water starts getting to our wood or getting into little cracks that are missing waterproofing, that's when the big damage happens. And a lot of times, if you can't see it happening, you have water just accumulating there behind the wall or something like that. And it becomes a very, very large repair. So any type of running water, we want to get it fixed immediately, regardless of who's responsible for the cost. And then last but not least, when you implement RUBS, it also raises your property values. So when you own a multifamily property, the value of your property is determined by the amount of net operating income you have per year in relation to the cost of your building. So if you're decreasing your costs, you're increasing your cash flow. That means you're increasing your net operating income. That means you're increasing your cap rate. And if you're increasing your cap rate, that means your property is worth more. So as a multifamily owner, it's pretty substantial what you can do on raising property value with just implementing the system. And so it's a really good conversation to have with a landlord who's not already doing it, or somebody who's looking at signing up for management services is, hey, have you thought about implementing RUBS at this building to reduce some costs, increase the cash flow, and overall, in the long term, increase the value of your building? All right, so how do we calculate RUBS? So RUBS is a formula that calculates the number of occupants at a property in comparison to the total number of occupants that are assigned to 1 meter. And then you times that amount by the number of residents in that unit that are in relation to the allocation to that meter. And then the way in which you split the ratio is up to the landlord, the manager, whoever is making the decision around RUBS. What is normally kind of industry standard, though, is to do 50% allocation to your square feet and 50% allocation to your number of occupants. So what that formula would look like is 50% times the number of occupants in the unit divided by the number of occupants on that meter. And then you multiply that formula by 50% times the number of residents in that unit divided by the number of residents allocated to that meter. And I have some cool tools to share with you guys, so you guys don't have to completely memorize that whole technical analysis. The most important thing for you to just realize is, though, is it's an allocation between the square feet of the unit and allocation of the number of residents allocated to the unit.
What happens if you have multiple tenants on 1 meter and one of them is on RUBS, but the other isn't? Are we able to still split that to RUBS?
Yes. So you can do that for 1 of 3 units, 1 of 10 units. It doesn't matter. 2 of 10, 10 of 10. And Appfolio is the tool that we use for this. And it's really great. It's pretty easy to just switch individual units on and off. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll show what some of that looks like. But yes, you can absolutely do that. If you wanted to, you could just have 1 unit, paying their allocation and the rest of them getting it included if you'd like. So now I wanted to show a quick example. So I mentioned 298 Hawthorne. This property is actually one of my favorite ones to reference when I'm talking about RUBS, because it's the owners were just like, when they found out about that it existed, they were just so excited about it. They have only 1 PG&E meter, so 1 gas, 1 electric assigned to both units. And then they also have 1 water meter assigned to both units A and B. So unit A was actually for this property, it's 298 Hawthorne, and then it's unit A. So the bigger ones, 298 Hawthorne, the smaller ones. Anyways, we'll call it A and B for the purpose of this exercise to not overcomplicate things. So in the case of 298 Hawthorne, we just, Ken and Mel just signed a lease for a new person to move into A. They're a single occupant, and that unit is 691 square feet. Unit B, Tsunami, she's been in there for a long time, like at least 5 years. She is a single occupant, and it's a little tiny unit. It's only about 300 square feet. So the total occupants for the entire building are 2 occupants, and the total square footage for the entire building are 991 units. So when you look at the breakdown, we're going to be dividing the 1 occupant in A divided by the total occupants of the building, so that's 2, and multiplying that by 50%. And then we're going to go to our 691 square feet, and we're going to add that to 300, giving us a total of 991. So we'll just divide the number in that unit and multiply that by the 50%. So I have here a bunch of calculators. All right, so this is a sheet that later in the presentation, I'm going to give you guys a link to it, and everybody has their own little sheet that they can start using to play with if you want to figure out what the allocation would look like. Appfolio does a lot of the work for us, but this is more so if you wanted to have a theory-based conversation with an owner, then you could help them understand what the impact would be for them. And so that's what we're going through here. So if we were going to do 298 Hawthorne, you can see here on these calculators, if it's highlighted in this light blue color, that means that's a field that you can edit. And if it's one that's not, then don't edit it. So the square feet allocation, we're going to keep it 50-50. And let's just say if the bill was $200. So we have 1 occupant in unit 1 at 690 feet. In unit 2, we have 1 occupant at 300 square feet. So we switch down here to the results. We see here that allocation now is 59.86%. And the allocation for unit 2 is 40.14%. So on a $200 bill, the net effect is that unit A is going to be paying $119.73, and then unit 2 is going to be paying $80.27. So to Kimberly's point earlier about making it more fair, well, now it's much more fair Tsunami down in her 300 square foot unit because she's not paying $100 for unit 1's usage. She's getting a discount based upon that formula. So this little pie chart just shows, that fairness being really like a visual of it, saying that A is paying the lion's share and B is getting a little bit of a discount for having a smaller unit. Restrictions and challenges. So the first restriction and challenge to be aware of for AB 14 or for RUBS is AB 1482. So implementing RUBS newly on an already occupied unit is considered a rent increase. So you cannot do a rent increase and a implementation of RUBS in the same year. You can technically do it, but it's very complicated because you would have to prove that your net increase was still less than 10%. It's really a gray area. And with AB 1482, some landlords are going to get sued for not following the law properly. I don't want to be one of those landlords. I don't want anybody in our portfolio to be one of those landlords. So I want to play AB 1482 on the safer side always. It's not worth the $40, $30 per month to risk having a massive lawsuit against you for abusing AB 1482. So I tell all landlords, don't do it in the same year you do a large rent increase. Another challenge for RUBS is it's hard to do when you have more than 4 units. It's not to say that you can't do it. We have 421 Delavino, 7 units that we're doing it for. We've had some big ones. Brett, can you think of any the big ones we've done? Maybe with the Did we do any big ones with Sridhar maybe? Anyway, so the challenge with doing with more than 4 units is that sometimes you'll get one unit that doesn't play well and they kind of really get this bill like really excessively high. And so they really ruin it for everybody else. And so it just creates a little bit of confusion. You can definitely do it with more than 4 units. You just are going to hear a little bit more complaining from the residents. So totally possible. I still encourage you to do it, especially if you're going to have like a built to sell type strategy, like you're increasing the value of a property to put it back on the market, then I would definitely do it. If this is a property that I'm personally trying to manage myself for a long period of time, it's probably not something I'm going to implement with more than 4 units. Another huge challenge for our personal RUB system, now this isn't for RUBs in general, this is just when you do it through CNC Property Management, is that there is about 45 to 75 day delay on reimbursements. The way that it happens is that we get a bill in the mail, and then Abby goes and puts that bill on Appfolio. The system automatically allocates the amounts to each tenant, and then it puts it for the next due date to be on the 1st. In the meantime, the landlord has already paid that, and then so they don't get the reimbursement until the time period comes, and then they don't get the distribution until probably the following time. So there's just a little bit of delay. It's not meant to be a perfect situation because it's free. So we offer this service as a value add to all of our clients for free. If they are very particular and want it like exactly right each month where it's like the exact same number, they can't do that through us, but it is possible to do. There's a lot of RUBS companies out there, and they have more advanced software, and they have employees and team members dedicated specifically to RUBS and collecting that money. So it's not the resources that we have, but we're offering it for free. So to me, free is better than not doing it, and free is better than paying somebody to just get like more timely. Like for example, Chris Cameri, when he first started doing it, he was very upset about not getting the timing right. He wanted his each month to be like, my water bill is $100. I want to get $100 from my tenants, and it was always a little bit off, and that really frustrated him. But then he went and shopped around to the RUBS companies, and he came back and was very happy to have the 45-day delay after he did a little bit of shopping. So free is definitely better than the 100% accurate on just timing, because it's not inaccurate on the amounts. It's just inaccurate on how many days they have to wait. And it's not perfect. Utility bills also don't come on a specific day. So it's not like we get, PG&E doesn't run the dates from the 1st to the 31st, so we don't get the bill on the following 1st. They run it from like whatever day the service started plus 28 days. So it changes every month. So there's no like exact day. We don't know exactly which day each individual utility is going to come in at. So what Abby does is she just batches it all. So the property that comes in on the 10th and the property that comes in on the 30th, they get uploaded on the same day. And that's how she's able to kind of maneuver around the complications around it. Complications around water forgiveness when there's a leak. So when there's a huge leak at the property and you get a very, very big water bill, it does create some complications getting the credits back to the tenants. So basically, when the bill is first entered to our system, it's going to charge the tenants a lot of money. When that happens, just notify Carrie and Abby. They'll work on getting the money credited back to them and then delay it a little bit. It just takes a little bit of communication, but it does create a little bit of complication, and your residents will get very upset and worried when they see that happen. So you can just tell them, rest assured, we are going to be applying for a one-time forgiveness for the leak. The leak is all repaired now. Once that credit comes in from the water company, we will then pass it along to you guys as the tenants. Just be in constant communication with Abby and Carrie when that's taking place, because it definitely will happen. I think like 421 Delavina, we had like a 10 times water bill one time. It was like normally the water bill is 40, 50, and one time it was like 500, and everyone's heads were flying off. But it's like, hey, it's okay. Just give us we need 30 days for this forgiveness to go through, and then once that goes through, we'll be able to get the correct allocation for you guys.
It's happened multiple times there.
A lot.
Yeah. So then that's another challenge that actually I didn't put on there, is that, when you have older plumbing, more complications are going to happen. And when you have a building with more residents, so like 421 Delavina has a lot of townhouses, so we get more occupants in those. So if you had 10 studios, you have less people, less water usage, less complications. And the last challenge is that not all units are made the same. So like in the example of 298 Hawthorne, upstairs has laundry and downstairs does not. So the only way to really, account for that is having the basis being on the square footage and the occupants. But sometimes you do have people a little bit still unfair because of what's in the units. So that's just kind of something you can't get around. But so it's not meant to be perfect, but it's meant to be really good. So now some details from us. I kind of breezed through this earlier, but I'll do it in a little bit more, I'll do a little slower and more detailed here. So when we take on a new property that's going to be utilizing RUBS, or if we're going to be implementing it at a property that we already manage and we're just going to be switching to the system, the first thing that we're going to do is put that utility bill in CNC's name. So we'll call Cal-Am Water, put it in our name, and then we will start receiving those bills. As we receive them, we pay them as normal on the 7th, on the same day as owner distributions. And so the owners will first be responsible for that bill. So the first bill, so if we implemented it August 1st at 298 Hawthorne, on September 1st, the owners would be responsible for paying that bill. And it would take about 45 days before they got reimbursed for that amount. When that bill came in on September 1st, Abby would put it on Appfolio. It would automatically allocate the charges to each tenant, and it would be uploaded to their monthly portal. The way that our lease agreement is written is that it is that charge is due with their upcoming rent payment. If the charge was input between the 6th and the 30th, or if it's a month of 31, 6th to the 31st, then they would be paying that on the upcoming 1st. But if it was input on maybe the 2nd, that's going to fly all the way around to the next upcoming charge before it's technically due per their lease agreement. So basically how it works is tenants need to be aware that their charge is due on the 1st. And if they're not aware of it, we can't expect them to pay it. That's kind of the logic behind it. That's also what kind of creates some of that delay when it gets like 75 days. That's usually what happens is we got the bill on like the 5th, and then it ends up having to wait a really long time before it gets redistributed. It's going to appear on their owner statement as a reimbursement fee. So they're going to have a line item for water. So like they'll have a charge on their expenses for water. And then on their income, it's going to appear as a reimbursement fee. So they will have both an income increase and a cost increase. It's because you need to show both of those on your Schedule E for taxes. And again, the system's not meant to be perfect. If the owner really wants a perfect system that's immediately always correct allocation, immediately correct, paid immediately when it's reimbursed and all that good stuff, then they should go to a paid company. But as long as they like getting the free services, we are happy to continue to facilitate that through Appfolio. And then, so now I'm going to just show real quick what it looks like actually on Appfolio. All right, so the first thing I want to show is just 421 Delavina. So if you look at a property on any of your guys' properties on Appfolio, you start moving down here and you'll see the first notice of it is pretty low on the property page, actually. It's all the way down to the RUBS area. So it says utility RUBS actually on every multifamily property. And if we add an allocation, it creates it within the system. So if we wanted to create a new allocation, that's how we would do it. Now, just a little caveat before I go any further on showing how to do it. If you do need to implement RUBS, don't do it yourself. Email Carrie and Abby. They've been like extenuously trained on how to do this. So I'm more so showing you just how it takes place so you have some awareness around it, but you don't need to be the expert. You don't have to always be the source of everything. It's good to be a resource a lot of times. So this is an example where you're just being a resource and you're just having some more knowledge about how it works. So on Appfolio, it'll show up down here in the utility RUBS. It's going to tell you which utility bill that we're reallocating, what that vendor is. So that's kind of how the system tags it when the bill gets entered. It's going to tell you which GL account the cost is going to go to. It's also going to tell you which GL account the tenant and the income will go to. So that's what I was kind of mentioning earlier. It's going to show up on your income as a reimbursement fee. Something I did not mention earlier is you can also do an owner contribution. So like a scenario where you might do an owner contribution is if you have a laundry room at the property. Sometimes the owners will say like, hey, I'll cover 10% of the water for the laundry room, or landscaping. Maybe they have like a little grass area that the owner really likes to keep and they know it's not a huge benefit to the tenants. They might throw in a contribution for that so they can keep watering the grass. That'd be common reasons why they would do that. And then last, you see the most important one, which is a tenant contribution, and it's stating the ratio in which it's being billed based upon the square feet and the occupants. And then if you go to an individual unit, this is one that you definitely would use more frequently, is if you go to the actual individual unit. This is how you can tell if somebody is actually being charged for RUBS and if their system is set up correctly. So this is one I would recommend if you have like any questions about, if a tenant calls you about a question about RUBS, or if you think somebody's not getting billed for them that should be, I definitely recommend just looking on your own for this one first. So right here, the unit information, it's going to tell you whether or not utility billing RUBS is enabled, and it's going to tell you the date that it was enabled on. So those are the two most important things. Last is that you want to make sure that always, whenever you have a RUBS building, that you always have the square feet entered. If you don't have a square feet entered here, it will not have an allocation for your square feet. It'll automatically, though, pull the occupants from your current tenant page. So like in this example, Miguel is the only occupant. Now, previously he had somebody else who was a financially responsible. So if they're no longer living at the property, you need to hide that tenant. And that makes it so they're no longer part of that calculation. So if you have a situation where you have like college students and there's 3 college students and 2 of them move out and only 1 moves in, we need to make sure we're hiding those 2 people that moved out and only adding that 1 that moved in. And that'll keep our formula correct.
What about cosigners? Are they counted?
So as long as under tenant, see here under tenant status, it says type, as long as it's a cosigner, that's Appfolio knowing they don't live there. So, and then you can edit that field. So if it's like, you know, somebody who has a cosigner that's incorrectly allocated, you can change it there. So cosigner will make it so they're not counted in the formula. Other occupant will make it so they are counted though. So you have like children, they should be designated as other occupants.
What if we take over a new building and on the lease agreement, there's only 2 adult occupants, but then we also know that they've had kids recently and they have like 2 more kids? How do we go about adding those kids into Appfolio?
So here, when you're on Appfolio under the tasks, you have add additional tenant. And so you should add that person. And when you're adding them, you can actually choose what type of the tenant they are right here under tenant status. And like that scenario, so like we should have everybody's name at the property. If there was a fire, it'd be really important for us to have everybody. But let's say like we just got it, you know, for a fact there's 5 people haven't responded back to you with everybody's names yet. You can go and put like, you know, occupant 1, occupant 2, occupant 3, but just definitely get that information later because it's for everybody's best interest for us to have accurate information on what occupants are actually living at a property. It's a huge liability issue to not actually have the right people in there. All right, so then this is a cash flow 12-month statement. So this is one of my favorite statements to look at because it breaks things down by the months in which they were accrued. And then it gives you kind of a full P&L for the net operating income. And so it's technically not a P&L, it's a cash flow statement, but it's the closest thing that we use to a P&L. So you see here, this is for 421 De La Vina. So you see every month, they're getting a reimbursement fee. These are the tenants repaying that water bill. And you can see in February and March, we had a little bit higher usage, but it also might just be the allocations of when they paid it. And then down here lower on the utilities, you see the water charges. And so notice that these water charges, none of them match the reimbursement fee. And it's because they're just getting paid at different times. That's all it means. So if you look at a cash flow for like the whole year, which is what people normally look at, it's probably a little bit closer because it tends to balance out the larger the sample size. But the smaller the sample size, the bigger the difference is going to be. Then last, this is the statement that most people look at. Now, if you're an apartment owner, you really shouldn't be looking at this one because it's a lot of looking to do, but you should get good at reading a P&L. But if you are reading these, you'll see them here as reimbursement fees as individual line items. So if you look at somebody's tenant ledger, you can go down and see, and we can see this bill was for May 19th through June 17th was charged $56.91 on June 3rd. And then they paid that bill on July 5th for $2,056.91. And that was allocating $2,000 the rent and $56.91 to the water bill. Okay, back to the CNC details now on the presentation. Cool. Okay. So I already mentioned this as I was showing it, but I just wanted to reinforce it. How do we implement? Please just email Abby and then CC Carrie and I. Abby's been doing the rubs for a really, really long time. She's fully aware of how to do it. She can make sure that it's set up correctly and through Appfolio. And if it's set up correctly, then Appfolio does most of the work for you. So you just, as a property manager, just have to have an understanding of how it's taking place, but you don't actually have to do any work on it other than reminding maybe your tenants to pay it on time. So let Abby do the keying basically on Appfolio for you. Okay, example. So we have a 3-unit building. All units are 1,000 square feet. Unit A has 3 occupants. Unit B has 1 occupant. Unit C has 2. It's a $400 water bill, and we're doing a 50-50 allocation between occupants and square feet. All right, so I'll just kick into showing how I did it now, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so property address. So we only want to fill in the blue fields, right? So we don't want to touch anything that's white. And so property address, I didn't give you guys a property address, so we can just go ahead and keep that blank. If we go down to our next blue, our square foot allocation, remember for presentation, we want to do 50-50. So I'm going to change the square foot allocation to 50, and now it's 50-50. For my total bill amount, I said it was a $400 bill, so we're going to have 400 there. So now if we go over here to our units, we look here for unit 1 has 3 occupants and it has 1,000 square feet. Unit 2 has 1 occupant and has 1,000 square feet. And unit 3 has 2 occupants and also 1,000 square feet. Okay. So that's the input. That's the information we know. Now, if we at the bottom of the sheet click on results, the spreadsheet has then kicked out the formula, the results for us. And so it's 41.67% goes to unit 1, 25% goes to unit 2, and 33.33% goes to unit 3. And the number on the right is what the $400 is accrued to them. So unit 1 is paying $166, unit 2 is $100, and unit 3 is $133.33.
I'm sorry. If like the total bill amount changes, it would automatically adjust it on the results?
That's right. If we had a $200 bill instead, we come back over here, our percentages stay the same because that's not going to change, but our dollar amounts are going to change.
Okay.
And then if unit 1 has another kid and they turn into 4 units, same thing, our percentages are going to change, which in turn will change our dollar amounts. So the sheet is set up to do all the work for you as long as you are inputting the blue fields. The property address, technically you don't need, but it was just for the purpose of keeping it organized and clear what's happening. So Soraya, you could be meeting with an owner who has a 5-unit building and they're like, hey, they're self-managing it. They're saying, hey, I'm really into this management idea because I'm moving out of state or I'm going to be busy with my new job, whatever have you. I'm having a kid and I'm going to be really busy and I'm going to need the extra help, but I don't know how I'm going to afford it because I'm already, breaking even the property or just barely making ends meet or whatever have you. And so then you can introduce the idea to them of RUBS and billing back those tenants that have water included in their rent. You can introduce the idea of now billing it back to the tenants, and you can take them through this exercise of the sheet so they can see what the net effect for them would be. And they can also see how that affects their tenants. And they can see hey, if this is going to be a $500 increase for my tenants, chances are I'm going to get a 30-day notice. So maybe it's something they decide to implement, as people move out, or maybe it's something they decide it's worth implementing now and not waiting until that time. So it's just a good conversation to have with them and how they can increase their cash flow, reduce their costs, and increase the value of their property.